Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin the first session at the moment. It's about 15 minutes, that a little late, so I make the introduction shorter. First of all, on my right hand, Professor Simon Tay. He's a chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, and he wrote a book called Asia Alone, 2010, with the Wisely publication. So I believe many of you know Professor Tay already, so I wouldn't like to go any further. My left hand used to be a former foreign minister. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Mr. Mendoza, he's from Philippines and at the University of Philippines, and I believe that he used to be a vice president for research and strategic study at the National Defense College of the Philippines. So he's been getting involved with lots of ASEAN experience, especially he used to be a visiting associate professor at the Graduate School of International Relations and Pacific Studies, University of California, San Diego. So I'd like you to please invite Professor Mendoza. And thirdly, we have former foreign minister, Mr. Kasit Pirom. And I just realized that he came from the former high school with me, Bangkok Christian College. So I just talked to him a while ago. And he's starting his career to serve in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand. And he's been involved with the Democrat Party, Thailand. I believe most Thais and ASEAN friends knows him well. Please welcome all of the panelists. Thank you. I would like to invite Professor Tay first. And according to the time, I think first I would like to limit the time for 15 minutes, if you please. But anything that extends from this one, that will be fine. So let's go with Professor Simon Tay, please.
Thank you very much. First, let me begin by thanking the organizers, Thammasat, and all friends there for inviting me to Bangkok. And apologize, I had to run upstairs to get some cough drops. I'm not particularly well. And my voice, I hope, is poor, but I hope the ideas I share with you will have some use. I am delighted to be on a panel with Kun Kasit, who I knew when he was foreign minister and enjoyed our interactions. And also, it's a great honor to follow immediately after Kun Surin, who gave such a good speech, both broad, deep, and personal. I will draw on this, I think, for some of the comments I have to make. My first point, and maybe about 3 points. The first point is about what we see globally among the US and the major powers. Second, what we as smaller, medium-sized countries might think to do. And third, what others have done. And what specifically, third, ASEAN can do. And I'll spend more time, I think, on the third part. Whereas while the background sketched by Kun Surin is truly magistral in its sweep and depth, the last policy part, perhaps, since he's now a retired ASEAN Secretary General, he leaves to us to think about. On the first, the shift. Clearly, we are going through a great time of change. But how we read the change is very controversial. I would say the greatest disagreement is about how fast, how permanent the changes are, and what are the critical signposts or junctures on the road. In other words, we kind of know we're on this path, but is it a path without any U-turns? And where are the left or right-hand decisions to make? For example, I would say there are about 3 views being talked about today in the world. The first is that this is the end of American power. And a lot of Americans say this. If they're correct, then America is in actually sort of a terminal decline. You will see America being overtaken in every measurement, economic, political, even security finally. And there are some people who have this rather pessimistic view. The second and quite opposite view is that what we are seeing is really just a blip, and that the Americans will recover from the crisis, and that we will return to something more or less like what was before, a status quo in which America remains the predominant power, the inescapable power, both across the world, but particularly in the Asia Pacific. And my own Prime Minister, Lee Hsien Loong, recently said in America that he was confident America will bounce back. Now, he didn't say status quo. His father has said status quo before. But I guess the word bounce back suggests, well, bounce back to where you were before. So those are, I think, the 2 ends of the spectrum. My own views in the book that Kun Chaichana kindly referred to, Asia Alone, suggest that we are somewhere in between. We are going through an interesting phase because of the effects of the global crisis that began in America and is still affecting American growth. Without that American growth, the political attention, the capacity, and the long-term capability to really project across the world and into the Asia Pacific, there is a big question mark. Even if people think the Americans need to be here today, there is a big question mark over 10 years, 20 years. And I would say my view is more like we are coming to an America which is still a key, perhaps the leading player in almost all global issues, but the gap is much reduced between America and the others, particularly China, and that additionally, there will be many issues which America cannot decide on its own, and there will be issues of which the other powers will decide and perhaps seize, which America can do nothing about. And I guess this middle view, which is not my own, but others like Farid Zakaria, the post-American world, of the important but reduced giant of America, we're seeing signs of it today. Whether it's the Ukraine, where things have gone against America's ideas, but there seems to be very little America can do about it except wave a finger, or in our own region. So that's roughly why I think we're moving to a more multipolar world. And like Kun Surin, I would suggest that we are seeing a multipolar world, but without true multilateralism. To say, while the problems cannot be solved by any one country, must need a collective countries, we have not figured out how to really make that work. The engine that has made multilateral institutions work so far has been America and the key countries. We have not really learned to work in a world where America has a reduced role and there are many other players with different ideas. So even if you take the middle point that we're moving towards a reduced but still important America, we have not found a solution to how make the world move forward or even keep it stable and at peace. The second part of my comments is about what others have tried to do and perhaps seem to be failing or perhaps going to dangerous waters. We are not just the only players in town. Look at the EU. The EU actually has been an experiment not only in pooling their sovereignty, in bringing the continent together, but also in a way in diminishing their overdependence on America. The transatlantic relationship continues, but with the EU being its own unity, has transformed. But in this present moment, particularly Ukraine, I think they have overreached. They've overreached in terms of trying to talk about the community of norms that even leads them to criticize other countries. Where they have emphasized so much on norms, they have tried to think about the international liberal order based on rules and norms, as if no one could defy this. They forget, I'm an international lawyer, they forget that international system, while it creates rules, has almost no mechanism to enforce those rules. So if any state, let alone the Russians, wish to bend, break, or in their case, say there is another rule, protection of the Russian-speaking people, in the end, there is no solution that can come purely from norms. Another kind of answer has come from perhaps the forgotten giant of Asia, Japan. It's been ignored for so long that we all thought it was going to a corner and slowly sort of fade away. But Abenomics and Abe has changed this. I'm actually quite a fan of Abenomics. I think that it is one possible answer, and the reforms that come up this summer will be critical to see whether it will come true. But I'm much less of a fan of what I call Abe visionism or revisionism about Japan's role in World War II and its future role in securing our region. Abe-san just gave a speech at Singapore at the Shangri-La Dialogue, where he emphasized the rule of law. It sounded very European, which is not entirely a bad thing. But it is not clear to me what he means by the rule of law internationally and in Asia, when Japan does not submit itself to these island disputes before a rule of law body, and is also, in a way, emphasizing its role in peace and security with more gifts to ASEAN neighbors, attempts to make alliances with those who, in a way, have a difference with China. So in this sense, I think that these two examples of people besides America and China show us both possibilities and dangers. And this leads me to my third point in the 3 minutes I have left. What can ASEAN do? I think we are on the right track. I think the community effort and the effort to become central to the wider Asia are critical. So let's take all that and the background and history that Surin has so generously shared with us as given. What do we do next? It is important, critical, that we now try to define and shape an ASEAN common voice. I do not mean a common foreign policy on all issues. The Europeans have tried this and failed. But it's critical for us to think through some of the most important questions, our relations with America, and separately with China or with Japan, and come to some understanding. It is important also to develop norms, although these norms must be more pragmatic than what the European Union has done. Because if 10 countries in ASEAN can speak collectively on normative questions, I think this will have some influence. I think it's also important to deepen our community so there's not only our governments that hopefully can agree, but our businesses and also our peoples. So in this sense, I do think that the community project is only really just beginning. And when it moves forward, can really shape ASEAN's role in the wider Asia in projecting that common voice. Additionally, I think it is important for ASEAN as a collective not to demonize China. While individual ASEAN countries have differences with China, we realize that China's presence on our doorstep is really a very complex one. There are dangers. We should not be blind to them. We should not take every Chinese gift as a gift. But there are possibilities for cooperation, for deeper understanding, and really, I think that this will be critical to not only to ASEAN, but to China, to have this near neighbor with whom we can have this kind of dialogue about the China we want to see. The third is at the national level. Governance has always been an issue for us, and whether it is democracy or some other system that works, I think ASEAN will have to find its own way. But what is critical also is to gear up for growth. Underlying our position in ASEAN is very much our relevance as an economic entity. Whether we import for ourselves and sell to ourselves, as Kurin sees the future, or whether they continue to be an important production base for other companies, this doesn't matter so long as a group, we need to grow. We need to grow and deliver the fruits of growth to more people to build stability. What do we need not to do or overemphasize, I think, is what I've left out. The military. It is inevitable and quite natural that countries, as they develop, will spend more money on the military. Singapore does. But this should not be overemphasized. The emphasis should equally be on agile diplomacy, economic relations, investment in the rule of law. And on the third part, I think we have underinvested. We have not, between all of us, we have had 1, 2, 3, 4 recent International Court of Justice cases. We also have had examples of cooperation between Thailand and Malaysia in co-developing resources in the Gulf of Thailand, Gulf of Siam. I think these examples of peaceful cooperation really need to be strengthened. Many years ago, the then great countries of Asia, India, China, Myanmar, and after that Indonesia, came to develop the principles of peaceful coexistence. These are still valuable, but we must not be fooled by them. The Indians believed in them too much. So when the Chinese took advantage of this and ran amok on the border they share in the high Himalayas, the Indians were not ready and not prepared to do anything. This was a great loss to the Indian government at the time. Clearly, we have to develop norms, but we need not be foolish and naive about it. We have a strategy, in other words, to do many things at one time, and hopefully ASEAN can. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Samantay. I think he touched upon, especially when we're talking about ASEAN as a community and a small country altogether. We cannot live alone with a big country, for instance, as he mentioned about the United States interventions, not in a bad term, but both bad and good. And this is one of the things that we have to realize, talking about challenging. For instance, as recently we have China, who cannot ignore the role of the United States in Southeast Asia and as a region. And also we see Japan, Shinzo Abe, who is now backing to the nationalist himself. And it's very important for us to realize the most important thing that he gave the answer to us that we, as a small country in Southeast Asia, even though we have a very big population in the country, we have to get together and work out together. I would like to pass on to Professor Mendoza for his view. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank Thammasat University for inviting me to address this international conference. It is indeed an honor. Second, it is not sporting to start a talk with an apology, but I should apologize for not getting my sunglass and putting it over my forehead. There's too much light here. I might dazzle you with my brilliance. Okay, kidding aside. We are tasked to survey the emerging security and political landscape of the world and how it would affect the region. I prepared certain talking points. I'm not sure whether all of you would have a copy of that. I didn't prepare a PowerPoint. I could, but I will divide my discussion into 3 parts. First, the role of the United States. The second would be the interaction between the United States and the other powers. And third would be the impact of this great power interaction on the region. I believe that any discussion of the emerging global political and security landscape must start with the United States. The the superpower which emerged, the sole superpower which emerged after the Cold War. However, more than 25 years after that, the United States now finds its preeminence. It's not so effective, even useless in the face of challenges and difficulties. And this is a product of several factors. Number one, its economy is in a slowdown. Since 2008, its unemployment rate has stayed at an 8% plateau. Recently, it has improved to 6%, no? As of June 2014, and yet inflation becomes another problem. In the political front, bipartisan consensus is almost impossible with the emergence of the Tea Party. The Tea Party has adulterated the Republican Party to almost unrecognizable proportions. And the continued inability to reach this bipartisan consensus, which has long been the source of American strength, is unique because it is directed against the very person of President Obama. That he is black, he is sometimes derided as a Muslim, and so on and so forth, is a sign of the hatred that is directed against his person. Not only against the Democratic Party, but against his person himself. And this has repeatedly led to near paralysis in federal government operations, including near failure to pass budgets. I should know because my daughter is with the U.S. Embassy in Manila, and they always are alert during budget time. They want to know who's going to go on a furlough and things of that sort. Budget difficulties have led to scaling down of military budgets. Nonetheless, the privatization of military activities has proceeded apace, and the use of unpopular drone systems in the war against terror also continues. Pew Research has already indicated how unpopular the United States is on a worldwide basis. It's only in the Philippines that the U.S. remains the most popular great power. The much vaunted war on terror is unraveling. Maliki's government in Iraq is a failed government which is under current assault by the ISIS-ISIL, while Karzai's government only holds sway in Kabul and its environs. Pakistan, a key ally in the war of terror, is having its own problems. Its hold over the frontier provinces is weak, and the loyalties of the Pakistan intelligence services is also suspect. Furthermore, the efforts of ISIS-ISIL offers opportunities from militants all over the world, from Australia, Britain, France, to fight in that front and gain valuable experience that could be used elsewhere in the world. So ISIS also represents a new development in that it aims for the establishment of a transnational caliphate. Originally, the political aim of Al-Qaeda, and this will be built in Syria, Iraq, and the Levant. Now, this is important because this piece of real estate has oil. Afghanistan does not. It is just rock. So this is a major difference. The economies of U.S. allies in Europe and in Japan are not in very good shape. And therefore, the capability of these allies to help the United States would likewise be affected. The problem in Southern Europe, with respect to public debt, undermines European unity. The Northern Europeans, Germany and the Netherlands, are not in the mood to finance what they call the spendthrift ways of the La Dolce Vita Southern Europeans. No. On the other hand, attempts of governments to impose austerity measures have sparked political unrest in Southern Europe, particularly Greece and Spain. No. Elsewhere in North Africa and the Middle East, the U.S. faces a situation which is fraught with uncertainty because of the repercussions of Arab Spring. Egypt has experienced a return to military rule after an Islamist government headed by a Muslim Brotherhood leader was ousted. The only bright spot seems to be Tunisia, where democracy is being consolidated. And the apparent contest is still between Islamists and secular Democrats. To the extent that the US and the West has associated themselves with Mubarak in Egypt and Ben Ali in Tunisia, therefore they have scant influence in both countries. Libya is a tragedy. No? Its transition is marred to constitutional government is marred by that vicious attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, which resulted in the death of the U.S. ambassador, and which continues to be an embarrassment for U.S. State Secretary Hillary Clinton. Up until now, we don't know the full story of that attack. Secondly, you also have a military leader conducting coup attempts, and he disguises them as anti-terrorist efforts. In Bahrain, you have a rising by majority Shia population against the ruling Sunni, suppressed brutally from the outside by Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states. And throughout the region, the U.S. is beset by complaints by its allies for not doing anything, not doing things right, and so on and so forth. So we have established that the U.S. has great difficulties. Of course, anti-U.S. powers like Russia and China will exploit such difficulties. Russia under Vladimir Putin, the guy who is fond of posing naked and riding on a horseback, is so different from Russia under the drunkard Yeltsin. No. The imagery is quite dramatic, and Putin refuses to behave like Yeltsin did, to give the West all concessions without getting anything in return. And in fact, what did Russia get? A NATO which is on its doorstep. So as far as Putin is concerned, that is not acceptable. Therefore, he seeks to reverse the trend of Russian decline and to relieve it of the dangers existing in its neighborhood. The apparent needle that broke the camel's back is Ukraine. The West overthrew, through so-called people power revolution, a pro-Russia elected government and installed a pro-Western government. As far as Putin is concerned, that's too much, and he acted using his cards on the table, making use of the Russian population in Crimea. Then he instigates a takeover of installations and so on and so forth. In China, the slowdown of the world economy led to a triumph of what I call the nationalist hardliner wing over the internationalist wing in the highest reaches of the Chinese party state. If the world economy is in a slowdown, these guys will see no palpable gain in participating in a liberal world economy. And therefore, it has embarked on an inward-looking economic development strategy, including infrastructure projects, and an aggressive program of asserting control over waters and territories in South China Sea, directed largely against the Philippines and Vietnam, and Senkaku Islands against Japan. So China's general strategy in East Asia is a carrot and stick, a classic carrot and stick approach. It seeks to drive a wedge within ASEAN itself by courting Cambodia, Laos, and East Timor with very juicy carrots. Even Brunei has recently opted from ASEAN efforts to come up with a unified position on the code of conduct. On the other hand, the approach to rival claimants, like the Philippines and Vietnam, plus Japan, can only be characterized as very aggressive. And yet, it is calibrated. Military vessels are not used. Only civilian vessels are used, like fishing vessels, Coast Guard vessels, so as not to provoke military response. It also builds facts on the ground, building islands on territories that they already possess, and that presents accomplished facts or fait accomplished to its oppositors, who have yet to get their act together. So the advantage of China is it's a single actor. Its interlocutors are many. They have to talk with each other. They have to come up with a unified position. Therefore, transactions costs would be quite high on the side of China's interlocutors. The rise of China and the spread of its influence during an earlier charm offensive prompted the U.S. to craft a pivot to Asia, renamed as Rebalancing to Asia, which is obviously designed to thwart China's bid for regional hegemony. But China is not idle. It has its own counterbalance strategy. Number one would be a security multilateral organization called SICA, and then it seeks to build an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank which will rival the Asian Development Bank. So you have a tit-for-tat move and counter move between China and its rivals in the region. Okay, now it's true that China's aggressiveness has prompted its oppositors to close ranks, but only to a certain extent. The announced readiness of Japan to forge a strategic alliance with the Philippines is noteworthy. Last year, Prime Minister Abe promised, when he visited the Philippines, promised and delivered 10 brand new Coast Guard cutters to the Philippine Coast Guard. Similarly, the drawing together of Vietnam and the Philippines to strengthen their position to China's aggressiveness is also important. Nonetheless, I do not see any abating of China's aggressive activities. It is essentially an opportunist, revisionist power that seeks to gain the most, while its oppositors are either in disarray or while legal proceedings are still ongoing. It is most likely to continue doing all of these things while U.S. attention is directed elsewhere in the rest of the world. This means that the U.S. will bear pressure on its Asian partners, particularly Japan and Australasia, to help counter China. What is quite curious at the moment is the relative inertness of Taiwan with respect to these territorial problems. Now, what about ASEAN? I think with respect to China, ASEAN faces two challenges. Number one, being marginalized as a player, being kicked out of the driver's seat. Number two, being sliced and diced by China's carrot and stick strategy. The weakest link in ASEAN are the poorer countries in mainland Southeast Asia. In fact, I was very worried about the summit in Phnom Penh, which failed to produce a unified statement. Even the newest state in the region and potentially the 11th ASEAN member state, Timor-Leste, is, I think, on China's side. The leader of the region, Indonesia, has not yet made its mark insofar as these territorial conflicts are concerned. Therefore, it remains to be seen if the conflict could be dialed down so that parties can agree to cooperate in activities like joint exploration while skirting the territorial claims problem. Now, in conclusion, my discussion so far indicates that the current and emerging global security landscape presents dangers for the Southeast Asian region. The situation will only improve if, number one, the world economy recovers, meaning to say, the West recovers, including Japan. Number two, crisis in other parts of the world abate, meaning to say, crisis in the Middle East, crisis in Central Europe. Number two, if these things, if the first two happen, it will allow the U.S. to rebalance at a faster rate than what is currently evident. Last but not least, and this is the most difficult part, the U.S. must learn to accept its reduced power, not only in the region, but also in the world, and must learn to accommodate the legitimate interests of powers like China and Russia, and to a lesser extent, India. Thank you very much.
I think we have learned a lot of, I wouldn't say lesson, but I think the history of Southeast Asia is very important. Recently, we believe that we are independent as a small country get together. But according to Professor Mendoza, we have to aware the role of the major power, not just only the United States, China, and also in Europe, and also the Russia at the moment. So I think this is very important because the topics that we are talking seem that we use Southeast Asia as a point of departure, but the impact is very important, and I think that we have to realize that the global power has an immense impact over our community. We will elaborate on this one later on when we have time, and after Professor Kasit, I would like to invite at least, we have some of the questions in which you might want to pose or maybe some comment because participation is important. So at the moment, I would like to pass on Professor Kasit Pirom, please.
First of all, I would like to join the two panelists in thank you ASEAN Center and Thammasat University for the kind invitation and for the honor of allowing me to come and speak publicly. The issue beforehand is the emerging global political security landscape, and maybe I could divide it maybe into two parts of the landscape. First is the first 20 years of post-Cold War situation, whereby one witnessed the supremacy of the United States, and we use the term unipolar. And that happened together with the spread of globalization, of openness, liberalization, democracy, market economy, and intensive connectivity of, I think, the normal traveling by air, but what is more important is the access to information through the internet and the interdependency of the globalized world. But the unipolar position of the United States did not last long, as one see the emergence of China and the BRICS group, China included, Russia and India, Brazil in particular. So from the unipolar world, it became the multipolar world, the first 20 years of the post-war situation. Then the past 10 to 10 years, it's no longer a unipolar or multipolar world, but it's more of I just want to invent a term, multiple poles of a mixture of state actors, ordinary countries, United States, Thailand, whatever, inclusive of regional organization and multilateral organization. But more importantly is the role of the non-state actors such as civil society, NGOs, the ethnic religious groups, armed, as we see at the moment, ISIS, the Sunni armed element, Al-Qaeda, etc. Then we see the big role of the corporations with that, I think, diplomatic skill of lobbying all over the world in various capitals to open up the markets. Then we also see that the non-state actors have taken the non-classical role of confronting the state. So I think conflict is no longer between states, but between state and non-state actors. So this is the landscape at this point in time, a mixture of players of nation state and non-state actors. Then I move on to the second question. Then what are the colors or the issues of the landscapes? I have a couple of them. The first one is the rising nationalism, both internally of a given country, as in the case of Scotland with the United Kingdom, or Catalan and Basque to a certain extent in Spain, or the various, quote-unquote, Muslim minorities reaching out for more autonomy or independence in southern Thailand or in the Philippines, and in various countries on the African continent in particular, or even the indigenous peoples in Latin America. Then we have the nationalism that has to do with external relations. And my colleagues, Dr. Mendoza just mentioned about rising nationalism in China, in Japan, and also in many countries in Latin America at the moment, led by President Chavez, under the banner of the Bolivarian Revolution, a very nationalistic Latin America against the US and the Western hegemony and the open market economy of the globalized world. Then we have also nationalism based on ethnic and religious belief, as we witness at the moment the call and the aspiration of the Kurds to form a nation state. And I think the breakup likelihood of not only Iraq, but I think possibly Afghanistan on the ethnic side of it, combined with the religious adherence either to the Sunni or to the Shia, and so on. The second issue is the doubt about the viability of democracy, which there was euphoria at the end of the Cold War, at the inception of globalization. But now, a lot of democratic society have turned zombie, illiberal, and the use of majoritarianism of the majority as the absolute power in a given country, which we see in abundance lately in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Thailand, and in many of the Latin American countries and so on, or even in Russia, in Ukraine and in Turkey and so on. So that is the situation, and the reaction from the West is not at all positive. There seems to be a lot of doubled and tripled standards reaction. The Western world closed one eye to the military takeover in Egypt, but is pounding General Prayut and his military cohorts at the moment to the wilderness, to the surprise of many of the Thai people that similar situation could have obtained a very different opposite reaction from the United States, the promoter and the exporters of democratic values. The form and the contents seems to be so far apart from the Washington perception what goes on in many of the aspiring democratic countries. The third point is the declining role of the United States. I think President Obama has a lot of difficulties with the American public in general, with the Republican Party and the Tea Party elements of the Republican Party. But he cannot keep on blaming the bipartisan politics inside United States and come out with a non-active role, whether on the Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, or in the Southern China Sea. I would suggest that the President Obama must have the guts and the courage to face the American public and explain why the essential and indispensable role of the United States in the world stage is a must, and it is not inevitable that the U.S. must be involved to ensure peace, stability, security, and most important of all, the viability of a democratization process in every country around the world. And must not take the lead from the Wall Street and the corporate world. He should work more and more with the people of the occupied Wall Street movement. And the fact that the U.S. is so hesitant, it gives the edge unnecessarily to Putin and to the Chinese leadership to exert their claim, whether ideology or territorial or political posture. On the Asia-Pacific scene, as in the case of China, and on the East-West relationship, as in the case of Europe. I was in Rotterdam 2 months ago for a meeting of liberal parties of the world, and heard a speech by the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. And in my meetings with a lot of European politicians, that they had 60 years of the US security umbrella. But now every single European country is spending more and more on military hardware because they can no longer rely on the backing up of the United States. And I think the Philippines, Vietnam, as Professor Mendoza did mention. And I was in Japan last week. The Japanese are becoming a military power and ready to confront the Chinese anywhere and at any time. So it's more of a self-reliance to do as much as you can by yourself with some friends here and there, but don't ever rely on the United States anymore. So that is a scene that is quite frightening if the United States and President Obama were to be so introvert and turning the United States again into an island country. Then the other issues is the breaking up of colonial nation state. And I think we are seeing this in a lot of countries in the Middle East. The Kurds will have their own nation state. The various ethnic and religious groups in the Middle East will go out to have an autonomy on the state because the colonial maps are no longer valid to the aspirations of the people, and people with similar ethics and religious background would like to be together and form a nation state. But once they have that, would they be democratic? Or are they going to be very conservative, religious one, and deprive the people of basic human rights and freedom? Is a cause of concern, I think, for the international community as a whole. So these rising cross-border allegiances based on ideologies, ethnic and religions and so on, will lessen and lessen more and more the viability of any nation state. Then the landscape is being more colored also by the cross-border issues affecting politics and security, whether it's migrant workers and various types of cross-border crimes, including the trade in small arms and the exportation extremism, religious one, ethnic one, as in the case of the Hindus in India, or the far-right elements, Le Pen inside France and all over Europe and so on, more and more intolerance among the peoples and among people with different creed and colors and religious belief and so on. And on top of that, the big problem of the inequalities that has to do with the unfair distribution of wealth inside the United States, inside Europe, and between the developed and developing countries. The gaps will have to be closed, and that needs a lot of political will and the decisiveness to change existing structures that cater to the few privileged one in each of the society. And this is linked to the question of ethical business or moral capitalism, that there must be more accountability and transparency. And I think this is where the World Bank, IMF, and the WTO would have to come into the picture more and more. So these are some of the issues of the multiple poles landscape that are in front of us. Then what to do? I think the United States, through the UN Secretary General, must do more. I think he has been hopeless so far, too slow, too conservative to come out with ideas and with initiative. I haven't seen much of the UN shuttle diplomacy to the various hotspots and so on. And he could have worked closely with the Arab League or the OIC, the International Islamic Cooperation Organization, to see whether some sort of religious tolerance or sectarian tolerance could have occurred, and some of the atrocity could have been prevented. And I think the United States, with so many of the think tanks and able people and so on, must get the act together. The European Parliament must become more assertive, and political parties inside the European Parliament among the European countries must work together to help the United States shore up democracies and freedom, and to be brave enough to say a spade is a spade and not to be oscillating and hesitant and so on. The more that they are reluctant, it gives rooms to Putin and the Chinese and so on, and the various sectarian leaders of the religious world to exert their will. And I think the world will become more chaotic. And I think various leaders would have to get together. One last point about ASEAN. I was the first chair of ASEAN under the ASEAN Charter. We had initiated many things, master plan on connectivity, the role of the civil society to meet the leaders, and participatory ASEAN with people at the center and so on. And even to rewrite history textbooks for children among the ASEAN countries, to rewrite history of Southeast Asia together, and to rewrite respective history textbook of each country, similar to what the Germans and the French did many years ago before they went ahead to start the coal and steel community. One has to settle the past and move to the future. But a lot of our initiatives under the Abhisit government were not being continued. And I would have to urge the bureaucrats in every ministry that you cannot stop the ASEAN process by keep on looking up at the political leaders, which they change all the time. A lot of things is a routine work. You can work behind the Buddha statue. You don't have to wait for the political masters to come and tell you what to do. And connectivity, history, textbook, civic society participation, all of this I think very positive initiative, and it is non-politicized. Were not being continued fully because the bureaucrats were playing politics. And I urge that every bureaucrats around the world in democratic society behave accordingly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Kasit. I think this morning, and all of the distinguished scholars just present lots of things that related to the book that I have in hand, written by Noam Chomsky. The title of the book is saying that Making the Future, Occupations, Interventions, Empire, and Resistance. I think all of the analysis this morning conclude at this one. At the moment, we have about, well, let's say 10 minutes from now, and would like to have floor participation. Okay, let's go. Professor, here's first and you second. Okay, just go ahead. You have a microphone, yeah, on your back. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Johar from ISIS Malaysia, the other ISIS.
The other ISIS.
Yes, I would like to commend the panel and, of course, the keynote speaker this morning, as well as the panel, Kun Krasit, as well as all the rest, Simon and Mendoza. We are looking in this session at essentially the global situation. I just would like to give my comments on 2 points. First, the idea that we have, what's the problem now is because we have a multipolar system without a multilateral, working multilateral institutions. I think that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking probably at this, because multipolar, the way we are looking at multipolar situation without multilateral institutions, and this is causing all the problems in the world. The other way of looking at it is actually the excesses of unilateralism that has contributed much of the problems that we see today. Now, of course, there are many other factors as well. But in terms of multipolar versus multilateral institutions, probably it's more, the multilateral institutions are still there. They have not changed. It's just the excesses of unilateralism, of unipolarity. What I mean by that is, this is what has caused Perhaps September 11, it caused an overreaction, but whatever it is invasion, occupation, intervention that is slightly less than invasion or occupation, and by intervention I mean changing regimes or governments, etc. Drones, attacks on norms, international law, and without much being said about it. So I think this is what has caused much of the problems in the Middle East. This is what has created a lot of the extremism, radicalism, even terrorism. This is what has caused, incidentally, the rise of tribalism and sectarianism. We talk about rise of nationalism. I think rise of nationalism, actually it has occurred in many times in our history. Chinese nationalism was there when there was invasion of Manchuria by Japan. Japanese nationalism was there when, Commodore Perry came in, and after that. So nationalism has been there all along. But what we are seeing today is rise of sectarianism and tribalism and sub-national impulses in many parts of the world, especially in Europe. So the first thing I would say is excesses of unipolarity and unilateralism in the world. This has caused much of the problem that we are facing today. Thank you. And this goes into your Chomsky's book.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, please. Yes. Goodbye.
Pontianetal Jr., area in Jakarta. When Western Europe was the economic power in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, Western Europe shaped global architecture. When US was the economic power, US shaped global architecture. East Asia will be the global economic power in the next 2 decades. The question really for us, how will East Asia shape the global architecture? Will it be China? Will it be a concert of China, India, and the rest? What is the role of ASEAN? Could it be that is precisely the role of ASEAN as the collection of middle powers, helping shape what will be the East Asia view of the new global power, the kind of norms? But does it also suggest that perhaps this is where this question of lack of regional architectures, mechanisms in East Asia need to be addressed? And perhaps it is ASEAN that should take that lead in shaping this regional architecture that will be consistent with a growing East Asia influence globally.
Can I?
Oh, yes, please.
Can I respond? I don't think so. At the ASEAN level, the problem that ASEAN is not moving and that necessitated Kun Surin to travel abroad is because the 10 ASEAN countries basically have a very different internal political regime. And if Hun Sen said to Surin what Surin reported, and I think the Vietnamese Communist Party and the Laotian Communist Party, and at that time the military government of Burma were reluctant, disdainful of the presence of the representative of the civil society in the same room, then I think we would not be able to move. It's not only having the civil society representative meeting the ASEAN leaders, we also finance the conference of the civil societies many times when we were in the chair of ASEAN, but that moved nowhere. you know, so that was the problem. Unless and until some sort of political changes in each of the ASEAN countries more into an open thing, then I think we could forge that type of leadership in the Asia-Pacific region and even at the United Nations. And at the world level, I mean at the Asia-Pacific level, I cannot see the Japanese and the Korean and the Chinese getting together unless the history book, textbook of Japan had to change what the German and the French did in the 1950s and before they set up, I think, the beginning of the European road towards the European Union. If we don't come to terms with the past, then don't forget about Asia Pacific shaping and leading the world. I think that's, I don't want to use unpolite word, but I think it's a bit nonsense. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Simon Tay have something to respond.
Let me approach this a bit more conceptually. I think the questions both by Johar and Juan Sintal talk about the role of norms and international law in terms of how Asia or who else can help shape these norms. I agree with Pak Johar that if America, which started the international law project, had stuck with it and really strengthened it, it might have gone further. Bush instead abandoned the project. The institutions we have, therefore, have kind of faded over the last decade. So the WTO, I mean, it's stuck. Climate change not progressing because people can't agree on the ways of working together. And so I think that whether you put it your way, the excess of unilateralism or the lack of multilateralism, I think clearly we're kind of shifting engines and we've not found the solution. Ponce's idea that in East Asia we might shape the architecture is one for the long term. I quite agree with Kun Kasit that in the short term this seems impossible. But we have to think of the long term in the sense that if we don't invest in trying to think about norms, architecture, etc., we will end up with a China-centric, power-based calculations of how we do international relations and politics in our region. If this is not what we want, then despite our weaknesses, ASEAN must make an effort in this direction. Of course, as I said, we can also develop ties with the USA, our own military capability, but I think an investment in structures, processes, and norms is a necessary thing to do right now.
Oh, yes, please.
Beyond unilateralism, I think what has played a great role in defining the post-Cold War period would be Westernization and homogenization. That's why you have reactions from non-Western societies asserting their identities, and part of these reactions would come from fundamentalist groups and other Islamist groups. But the developments in the post-Cold War period would be the result of a normal law of physics. No? The US cannot behave otherwise as a unipolar power. Therefore, the reaction will come. The reaction from weaker powers, including the reaction that will come from Russia and China and the non-state actors. The US tried to shape the world in its image. No? It's not just a question of acting unilaterally. It wanted to shape the world as a consumer society, as a democratic society, and so on and so forth. An objective that is obviously not shared by the rest of the world, and the rest of the, or parts of the rest of the world, and the rest of the world will likewise react to defend their way of life. So it's a question of defense of ways of life. Now, with respect to what is going to happen in East Asia. Indeed, it's true that the center of economic gravity is in our region. It's no longer in Europe. It's no longer in the United States. The only, I have to note that there is a difference. The world order that was built in the post-Second World War period was a world order which was based on a set of nations which basically shared a common set of values and civilization. Another set of nations were not included. I'm talking about the Soviet bloc. I'm talking about the third world countries. Basically, they were excluded from the liberal world international order created in the aftermath of the Second World War. Now it has shifted, the center of gravity shifted to East Asia, and we have to accept that there is great diversity in East Asia relative to what is there in Western Europe. And therefore, the difficulty of creating multilateral institutions that will manage the primacy of East Asian economy should be appreciated. Will we make use of the centuries-old model where the celestial kingdom was this suzerain of Asia, that all the rest were just, shall we say, tributary states, even in a symbolic manner, unlike the Western imperial system? I think the challenge, as far as East Asia is concerned, is to find the appropriate multilateral order which recognizes the diversity not only in political systems, but even in all aspects of our life, including our religion, culture, etc. Thank you.